Hello and welcome to Politics Today. In this programme today, we'll be discussing the English Channel migrant crisis and ask the very important question, has the government lost its mantra on secure and safe borders? And in today's programme, I'm joined by Regan King, who's a Christian author and activist, and also David Hughes from Prayer for Parliament and the Nations. David, I know on your heart was wanting to very much talk about this very up-and-coming day of prayer for Britain. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to plug this David Hathaway conference in which he's calling the nation and Christians to pray.
Yeah, I got this morning, actually. It's a little leaflet which basically talks about National Day of Prayer, and what David's saying is that as many churches and Christians as possible come to the Wembley Arena in London. It's the SSE Arena. It's between 10 and 6 p.m. But to get your tickets, you go on ukdayofprayer.co.uk,
And the date, which is important.
Sorry, Saturday the 26th of this month, which will be in a couple of days' time.
Great. And Regan, it's great to have you on the programme. And of course, today we're discussing the migrant crisis. Now, according to my notes here, since November 2018, there have been over 239 attempts to cross the dangerous English Channel with those seeking asylum, which makes a mockery of the government's pledge of promising to cut immigration and to protect us with secure borders. What are your thoughts on this current migrant crisis we're seeing happening in the English Channel?
Well, it's quite complicated in some ways in that you have to consider two things, particularly for ourselves as Christians. We need to consider on one hand the sovereignty of God, which means that God is in control regardless of how our immigration law is holding up or not holding up. At the same time, we do know that God's sovereignty has established borders and boundaries for a reason. In Acts 17, the Apostle Paul speaks to the people in Athens of how God has made from one nation, from one man every nation. So we are all human beings made in God's image, and yet he has established boundaries for us to live in and particular borders. Going back to Genesis, we see both in the Tower of Babel incident as the nations are scattered, different languages, different cultures arising, onto the refuge that was sought by the descendants of Abraham in Egypt during time of famine. There is a case to be made for immigration and asylum. At the same time, there's the sovereignty of nations. God has given governments the right to make laws and to keep laws for the good of their particular people. And where immigration and asylum that's uncontrolled is occurring, we have to ask the question whether or not the government is actually fulfilling its responsibility to act in the interest not only of others who are genuinely needing refuge, but also of its own people. Looking at some of the benefit situation in the United Kingdom and the housing that is provided to refugees when many ex-servicemen, many others who have given much to society are left in some cases completely homeless. We have to ask whether there's some imbalance there. So we respect these people as human beings made in God's image. We seek to treat foreigners, whether legal or illegal, with the compassion of Christ, with grace and truth at the same time, seeking to empower them to do the right thing biblically. At the same time, that's where righteousness fits in. We recognize that the government has the responsibility to act rightly, to protect its people, and to continue to, in some way, act in the best interest of the nation that God has given.
And David, drawing upon your vast experience of serving in the Royal Navy, it'd be great to have your operational insight into this crisis, particularly as our Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, over the Christmas break, decided to cut short his holiday in Africa, fly back to the UK urgently. He initially rejected the offer by the Defence Secretary, Gavin Williams, to deploy the Royal Navy to actually send these migrants back, but has now changed his mind. What do you make of this whole crisis that's affecting the government on this issue?
It's another classic of a U-turn at the last minute. The Home Secretary had to come back because the whole thing was getting out of hand. I was talking with my MP, Justine Greening, about 5-6 years ago when she asked what do I think are the major problems, and Border Patrol was one of them. I said there's only 3 small patrol boats for the whole of Great Britain. And the government should be looking at it because the problem is going to come. Well, the problem has now arrived with all these people coming across, and all we have is 1 Border Patrol craft here and 2 Border Patrol craft down in Gibraltar on the Mediterranean. I mean, that's not our main border. So the Royal Navy should have been down there, and they probably are, but the Border Patrol should be up here. But now it's taking a couple of weeks to get them back to patrol in the English Channel, and you need more than 1. You need at least 2 so that you can have 1 on patrol and 1 off patrol, and they can work a shift system. But at the end of the day, it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, I've commanded a patrol boat in that area before, when I was around. It's very easy to patrol. You have the radar from the Coast Guards being able to update you if your radar isn't picking anything up. And with a bit of speed, you can intercept. It's not a problem, but I think the problem is that the government aren't looking at this with spiritual eyes or godly eyes. They're just doing everything they think, and they get it wrong.
And Reagan, if we look at this issue and look at it in a kind of wider context, this is something that's not unique to the UK. Certainly since 2005, we've seen the mass uncontrolled migration from Syria into Europe. We see this as a problem affecting Europe. Also, Libyans also trying to get through to Europe via Italy, and then also in the United States as well on the America's border with Mexico. So clearly this is something that is new in which governments have had to deal with. Why do you think we're seeing such movement of people on a mass scale today?
A couple of reasons. One being that people truly don't understand how the West works. They are experiencing unrest in their own nations. They're experiencing difficult times economically. There are some people who are genuinely fearing for their lives and are fleeing religious persecution. I know many Iranians who have settled in the UK because they were fleeing religious persecution. I also know several Kurdish people who have settled in the UK fleeing religious persecution. Having left Islam, they were outcast and alienated from their own families and in fear of their lives. So I believe in those cases where there's a threat to life, the request for asylum following due process is legitimate. However, many of the cases that we're seeing in regards to this Channel migrant crisis don't appear legitimate. There's a lot of human trafficking going on. There are people who are seeking money and riches, thinking they'll find it. But my experience of discussing this same issue with people in places like Southall in West London, where there are quite a few illegal immigrants, is that they arrive in the UK believing that the streets are paved with gold almost, and they discover it's not exactly that way. They find themselves getting wrapped up in a substance abuse to try and cope with some of the pain and difficulty they're in. They find themselves potentially homeless, and they find themselves really struggling to make ends meet. So there are some overinflated expectations that are driving many people, particularly to come to the West.
Yeah, and Dave, we have to really mark a distinction between economic migrants and also those seeking political asylum, particularly as we see on the rise a large number of persecuted Christians around the world, particularly in Islamic countries. But it seems that the majority of these people who want to get to the UK are doing it for economic reasons. How important is it the government makes a clear distinction between those seeking political asylum and those also seeking to gain illegal access to this country for financial gain?
Yeah, I think it's important that the government do work that system out. The problem is going to be that how do you get to the bottom of it? to get the traffickers is one thing. Because one of the things that's going to happen, I believe, over the next 2 or 3 months is there's going to be more and more people trying to come in for whatever reason. Obviously, you've got to work out whether there are terrorists amongst them or not, because they're being promised, get in before Brexit, because once Brexit happens, the border will be closed. Well, the border's not particularly open at the moment. So I think, we've only seen half of what the problem's going to be, but yeah, all types are trying to come over here. This is as Reagan just said, they think the pavements are covered in gold, but they're not.
Clearly not.
And we see more of them on the streets begging.
Absolutely. And Reagan, if we see, you mentioned the vast majority of those migrants seeking asylum in this country are Iranian, trying to cross the English Channel. I mean, they've travelled here from Serbia. From there, they've entered into Europe and then gone to France, and even the French police have helped point out where the ports are and where Britain is. So when it comes down to who's at fault here, is this the British government or is this the EU's policy of open borders that contributed to this crisis?
I think there is some shared responsibility up to the point of arriving in Britain. However, I think it's fair to say that the major responsibility rests with the EU policy of open borders. It's impossible to track people's movement under such a system. Tracking people's movement is not something that is discriminatory or is hateful towards people. It's seeking to protect and provide security for the people for which a nation is responsible. And so it's sensible to have a system wherein those people seeking asylum, and with many Iranians, there is a legitimate case for political asylum. Look at the fragmented situation in Iran for the past few decades, really. And it's understandable why many people would desire to leave that environment and that situation. At the same time, there is a due process, and while there are some cases where you can accept and understand and overlook ignorance of that due process. Governments need to be doing more to make sure that asylum seekers are properly registered, properly tracked, and properly and equally distributed across the nations.
But I think on that one, the whole thing's been compounded because so far we've let lots of people in already. And of course, if they've got their friends and relatives and cousins and aunts and uncles living here, where are they going to go? They're going to go and join them. That's the classic.
I'll give you one example that was in the news recently, and this was an Iranian asylum seeker who was picked up in a floatable kayak, rowing his way to the English shore. He was then picked up by the border control, was then sent directly to Croydon, where his process for asylum was assessed, and then he was given asylum in the UK. Now, surely that sends out the wrong message, doesn't it? And if the government is not doing enough to stop this uncontrolled migration, surely then that just encourages more and more migrants to take this dangerous trip across the English Channel to get to our shores.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We're so soft-hearted. I mean, if you go to the United States, their border patrol is rigid. We've got to be getting to the same thing. Whether it'll happen after Brexit, I don't know. But the other problem is a lot of the process in the passport offices and other places, they stick with their own clan. So if you've got people from those countries already on the staff there, I mean, I know people who say they've been in these offices and, priority is given to, oh, that's my friend, oh, you can jump to the front or I'll help you through. We don't run it properly and the authorities don't seem to take a grip of it.
And isn't there a great danger here, Reagan, in the fact that there is this mass uncontrolled asylum that we're seeing in our country, and to the extent that more and more will come if we don't see deterrents put in place, if we don't see the government getting stronger and having more patrol boats, more patrols sending migrants back, or even flying them back, for example, to Iran. Wouldn't that send out the kind of right message to these people who are seeking asylum in this country? country?
I think definitely there does need to be improved security. The system is extremely disorganized. It could be that there's a lack of resource, but in many cases, I think it's very simply just a lack of common sense and proper dealing with the individuals requesting asylum. I know of individuals who have legitimate claims to asylum who've had their asylum claims rejected and have had to go through a lengthy appeal process, while as others whose claims are quite a bit more spurious have been readily accepted and embraced with open arms. There's something broken about our system. Whether or not it's improved process of deportation that's going to fix it or not, I can't say. That certainly needs to take place when we see people breaking the laws when they are here. We are not holding those seeking asylum, those coming into the country as immigrants to the account that they need to be in some cases. There has to be a clear understanding that if you are in this nation, you abide by this nation's laws. And if you don't abide by this nation's laws, you will be returned to your own country.
And David, I'll just give you another news story, which I think is very important, because this is the kind of message that so many of these seeking economic asylum in the UK are experiencing. For example, Daily Mail gives an account recently about an interview one of their journalists had with a migrant in France seeking asylum in the UK, where he said one of his close friends had crossed over the channel, is now living in Birmingham, where he's received a 3-bedroom flat, and he's very happy, so he wants the same. Now, isn't there a great danger in the priority the government gives to migrants and asylum seekers by giving them housing, by giving them social benefits, that those such as in the armed forces or others in this country that feel that they are 2 or 3 third on the pecking order, and this can't be good for social cohesion, can it?
But this is the problem we've been seeing for quite a while. I mean, the last government was so politically correct that people, from another country would get away with murder, and whereas people in this country that, who are legitimately born and bred here, are stymied and held back. And there's still an element of that going on. I mean, it's out of order. We've just got to, as Reagan's just said, we've got to crack down, be strong and tough, and not listen to all the people who say, human rights and everything like that. We'll rush to Strasbourg. Well, at least after Brexit, they wouldn't be able to run to Strasbourg for the European Court of Human Rights.
Yeah, I thought you were right on that one. And Reagan, I think an important factor is that surely this is contributing to a rise of the far right, as we see that working class men in particular, who see that nice flats are being given to asylum seekers, are given to others, and then above themselves, so start to see that Britain is now actually acting in their own interests or looking after their own people, but is more interested in looking after the welfare of these asylum seekers. Now, that is very dangerous politically. It's even considered politically incorrect to actually discuss this issue because it's so sensitive. But how important is it the government tackles this as a major priority before we see huge rifts in our society? And we're already seeing so much over division over so many issues that this could actually cause the situation to be worse.
It's extremely important that the government seeks to get things in hand. People have had enough of talk. They desire action. And it's one thing to promise a strong and stable leadership. It's another to apply it. And what we've seen is because of a lack of strong and stable leadership in our government, with constant unrest in the cabinet and constant turnover even in the cabinet, people have lacked trust, and they have lost trust in the government's promises. Certainly, as Christians, we know we're not to put our trust in those people who are over us, but that doesn't change the fact that they should be trustworthy and that we should hold them to account. The far right is a reaction to the more left-leaning side, which has this idea that multiculturalism, all cultures are equal, all beliefs are equal, so we should receive anyone and everyone who comes to us. The far right has reacted to that idea by saying, well, we actually don't want anyone here who is not one of us. And that's dangerous. Even many of the people in the far right wouldn't actually agree with that if they understood the implications fully of what they're saying. At the same time, churches and Christians have to be very careful that when we speak of this issue, we are clear. There's respect for these people, these migrants, as human beings made in God's image. At the same time, there is righteousness. And while God is sovereign over the nations, he has given nations individual and independent sovereignty to make their own laws. We should pray for our nation and its promotion of laws that are righteous and good. And part of its responsibility is to ensure that the population is controlled and managed in a way that is right and healthy for its citizens.
And Dave, one of the key issues, the referendum took place almost 3 years ago with our membership of the European Union. One of the major issues that came up time and time again was this issue of mass uncontrolled immigration and how it's changed so many of our towns and cities throughout the UK. Surely this current crisis affecting the English Channel is causing more problems, and if the government doesn't get to grips with this soon, every migrant from all over the world will think that they can come here and that we don't need open and secure borders and they can just walk through and then find themselves being given benefits on behalf of the government. So isn't there a bigger crisis here, for example, with the Conservative Party wanting to get re-elected back into power, and if they can't offer us strong and secure borders, if they can't stop this massive migration chance, what chance is there for the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, and the classic, as we've seen in the last few weeks, is that we've got to have a strong border, and the Home Secretary has dithered around whether, for example, that offer you mentioned from the Defence Secretary, okay, as I said earlier, they've only got a Royal Navy new HMS Mersey because it takes 2 weeks for the border patrol vessels that have been in the Mediterranean to get home. One of them still sitting in Gibraltar. But even when they get back, I think the Royal Navy should still continue to keep one of their new patrol boats, they're brand new, helping and working with the border patrol. You can't have too many people on the English Channel at the moment because it's going to get worse up until the 29th of March, because the traffickers are offering, get in before the gates close. And there's no harm in keeping one of the Royal Navy present. It does show the firmness and the resolute that the government ought to be showing. And the new vessels were designed for fishery protection. Well, the problem with the fishery protection needing protection won't happen until after the 29th. That's when. But so the next 3 months is going to be critical.
And Reagan, maybe we also need to tie in the issue here of human trafficking, and maybe the government needs to do more to crack down on this illegal trade, as people are making huge amounts of money and getting rich off the back of this, to the extent now that we're finding that immigrants are even being put in mattresses and mattresses sealed up to try and get into Europe as well. So they're going to new lengths to try and break our border system, whether that's in Britain or whether that's in Europe. So what policies do you think the government can put in place to tackle the issue of human trafficking?
There definitely needs to be a massive crackdown, particularly on those involved in trafficking. This idea that people are solely coming to the UK as migrants seeking asylum needs to be removed from our minds. It's a delusion. Many of these people are not coming under their own wills or because they desire to. Others are coming because they desire to, because they've been promised work. And once they find themselves in the UK, they find themselves entrapped in a situation where they are being trafficked in various ways for domestic labor in some cases, often for sexual slavery. The government hasn't been particularly clear in regards to how it's going to tackle human trafficking more, how it's going to particularly combat sexual slavery that's going on. Indeed, the allowance of and turning a blind eye to prostitution is perpetuating the problem. People find themselves being shipped over in freight containers or, as you said, bundled up into mattresses, and then they arrive and maybe at some point in time they'll escape the slavery that they're in, but at the same time, where will they go once they've escaped? What help will they have? It's a very real crisis.
And David, how should we be praying about this situation?
Definitely prayer is going to help. We've got to keep praying for the government to have wisdom and discernment. That's an interesting one. We're doing that all the time. We're praying for this nation, for those leaders, and they're not making a very good job of it. But just keep them in the prayers. We pray that the Home Office get to grips with it. There are Christians in these various departments. We're already on a Thursday, as people know, we pray in Parliament every Tuesday, but on the Thursdays we've started praying with Christians in government, which is the civil service wing of Christians, and we're praying a lot over the nation, but I think we've got to focus a little bit on the border patrol and what the border people are going through, because I have to honestly say we've been praying for the nation, but we haven't actually been focusing on the problem that's going on at the moment. It's only come to light really over the Christmas period, and I think now it's, for the next 2 or 3 months, intercessors and Christians need to carry on praying on that area as well.
David and Reagan, thank you so much for being my guests on Politics Today. And I want to thank you for watching this programme as we've discussed the crisis affecting the English Channel with so many migrants wanting to seek asylum in the UK. And I think it's important that our government does all it can to protect our borders and secure our borders. And we need to pray about this very serious issue. So thank you for watching Politics Today.